He usually hated Hoskins. The man was insufferable, always sending in lackeys to do his dirty work and then taking the credit for himself. That's what happened last year, when Hoskins sent a small team to capture some escaped pteranodons from Isla Sorna after there was an incident with some kid and his family and some scientists. He had led that mission, not Hoskins, but it had been more of a personal vendetta more than anything. He and Hoskins had been friends with the team that escorted the civilians, and not one of them had made it off the island alive. Less than a year ago, they had a lot less people, so they often worked with other agencies on larger operations, during which time they had become friends with a man named E.D.G.E and his team, Nash and Cooper. Aside from those times, it used to be just Hoskins and a small team of his quote-unquote security consultants. He scoffed at the word. He believed they should be called what they were: mercenaries. Oscar Hallow was Hoskins' second-in-command and had been put in charge of the newly dubbed Asset Containment Unit, part of the InGen Security Division. They were in the process of cleaning up Isla Nublar in preparation for Masrani's new park, Jurassic World. He had been with Hoskins since the beginning of their operation, back when they were a small group of only around 20 people. Hoskins wasn't always this way. After rising to power within InGen late the previous year, Hoskins shouldered far more responsibilities than before, and it put a great deal of stress on the man. He was always callous, arrogant, and egotistical, but what mercenary wasn't? His sudden uprise, however, had worsened these traits, turning him into an insufferable boss over the last year, joining less and less on missions until he only came for the most important. The last time he had seen Hoskins in the field was nearly a month ago, when he had overseen the capture of the Tyrannosaurus. It had been a simple and smooth operation, mainly led by Hallow, but again Hoskins claimed credit for it. Hallow had only remained because of the new pay. Masrani was dishing out a basically unlimited supply of funds, and Oscar and his mercs had never been so well paid or staffed. So he stayed, despite his usual dislike of his former friend and boss. But this was one of the rare times his resentment for Hoskins wasn't growing. Today had been a fairly simple operation, moving some of the herbivores from one enclosure to the ship for transportation to Isla Sorna, where Masrani had paddocks built for them while the main structures were built here on Nublar in the meantime. He was escorting one of the featherless ostriches, as his men called them, truly a gallimimus, and he was just glad that this dinosaur wasn't trying to take a chunk out of him like some others. But in truth, most of Isla Nublar's carnivores were in hiding. Aside from the Rex, they had only encountered a single Dilophosaurus and some of the little green scavengers, the Compsognathus. They had been warned that there were likely velociraptors present on the island as well, due to some defect in the original batch that allowed them to mate, but they hadn't seen any. Perhaps the large human presence was deterring them. Whatever the case, this place felt far more secure. He had seen the operations on Isla Sorna briefly, when he and Hoskins had brought some security personnel there. That island was pure savagery. The island had been overcrowded when Masrani first gained access to it, and despite their recapture of many of the dinosaurs, the ones in the wild proved to be far more savage than the dinosaurs on Nublar. And so, Hallow was grateful to be here, simply moving some dinosaurs to a ship, rather than worrying about the two large raptor packs or Masrani's illegal monster. He was grateful that Hoskins didn't seem to realize his growing resentment, otherwise the spiteful man might have assigned him to Sorna. But a good thing can't always last, as his radio started up.
Hallow, come in. This is the operations center. Come in, Hallow.
Go for Hallow. He sighed, putting out a cigarette against the ground as he watched the Gallimimus get led onto the ship by two of the men.
Hallow, new orders just came down.
He sighed even deeper. He looked up at the sky, seeing the sun still high, but beginning its descent over the horizon. He glanced at his watch. It was only about 3:30. Say again, OC? A new objective. What do you mean, over? He was genuinely confused. Usually that meant they were going to secure a new location, but usually those operations began early in the mornings to ensure that the mercs had daylight during. Many of the island's carnivores were nocturnal and preferred to hunt at night, or so the eggheads at InGen told them.
You've got a new objective. Plain and simple. One of the other teams was sent up north to check out some quarantine pens and secure the nearby entrance to the maintenance tunnels. Radio's been choppy ever since they got past the old visitor center, and we haven't had contact with them in over an hour. Get a squad together and go check it out. Over.
He shook his head, but he wasn't entirely surprised. The north side had been giving them radio problems ever since they first arrived. Copy, OC. Send the location, I'll pull a squad together. Over.
Acknowledged, Hallow. Meet up with yours team and take charge of them. If the objective isn't complete, make sure you finish the first before heading back. Main objective is those quarantine pens. This order is straight from Masrani himself. It's a surprising one. If you find animals still alive in those pens, you're to neutralize them. No capture this time. Once you're done there, head to the tunnels. Once the area around the tunnel is secure, contact us, and we will send in the relief team, along with Masrani's people to set up operations. Over.
Now that was a shock. One of the biggest orders they had was to avoid harming the dinosaurs as much as possible. Not only were they incredibly valuable in a monetary sense, but Masrani seemed to be a bit of a dinosaur nut himself. Say again, OC? You said neutralize the animals? Over?
Yes, Masrani seems to think they'll be dead anyways, but if they aren't, he doesn't want them in the park. Something about security concerns. Over.
That seemed entirely suspicious. There didn't seem to be any security concerns over the giant Tyrannosaurus that slept a few miles west of their main camp in a holding cell that was far too flimsy for his liking. What kind of dinosaurs are we dealing with here? Over.
They didn't say. Even Hoskins doesn't know for sure. All we were told was that if they are alive, eliminate them with extreme prejudice. They're supposedly somewhat small, about the size of a big dog, but it might get dark in those tunnels. The power grid looks like it's been cut off up there, so bring some flashlights.
The more he asked, the more he was confused by this odd turn of events, but he knew better than to argue with orders, especially ones made by Masrani himself. He resigned himself to it, slowly nodding. Copy, OC. I'll bring the satellite phone just in case we lose radio contact. Over.
Copy. Good hunting, Hallow. Over and out.
As the radio cut out, he walked over to some of the mercs who were gathered around together. He felt a bit uneasy about this situation as a whole. What kind of dinosaur is so concerning that he was to eliminate them rather than capture them? It didn't make any sense. The eggheads barely let them kill velociraptors even when people's lives are in danger. But he put that aside because he knew the men would be happy that they finally didn't have to hold back. Saddle up, boys. New orders just came down. I need 5 of you with me. Live fire, so bring whatever you want as long as it can handle a dinosaur. Some of the men instantly got smiles.
Live ammo? Christmas must have come early,
said one of the men, Ramirez, as he smiled. What, did one of the eggheads get nipped by a science project so he wants it put down? Said another, a man named Apone, and despite his smile, Hallow lifted his hand to stop their jeering. Yes, live ammo. Something about security concerns with these dinos. Yuri's squad was sent to check out some old quarantine pens in the north and secure the maintenance tunnel entrance nearby. We've been ordered to eliminate any surviving animals in the quarantine pen, though fair warning to all you trigger-happy idiots. They're probably already dead since it's been around 9 years or so. OC just wants us to check and make sure.
What? Since when does Yuri need us for backup? And Jerkoff is always boasting about having a perfect record.
Scoffed Ramirez. Yuri was a newer member, only hired on once they had become InGen Security, but he had also risen quickly to a higher-ranked member of their agency, to the chagrin of some of the vets. We lost contact with him up there. You know that the radio is terrible that far north. I'll be bringing the sat phone just in case. Ramirez, since you seem so eager to prove that you're better than Yuri, you're with me. Johnson, Hicks, Apone, and Tiro, you 4 are coming too. Get your gear and meet me at one of the trucks in a half hour. Make sure you've got flashlights and let's make this quick. I want to get back in time for dinner before the rest of these animals eat it all, and I don't mean the dinosaurs. Their group dispersed and Hallow himself went to gear up, but the entire time his thought went to that mystery dinosaur they were going to confront. They had been provided with InGen's original list of dinosaurs, creatures that they could expect to encounter, but ever since Sorna, Hallow knew better. Sorna had been full of dinosaurs that weren't on the official list, like the monster that had terrorized the team that was still there, but whether that was Masrani's doing or InGen's, he was unsure. He was beginning to grow worried that this might be another one of those scenarios. His team were good mercs, but sometimes it wasn't about being good when you were dealing with revived prehistoric animals. Hoskins had lost more than a few of his men on Sorna, though luckily none had died on Nublar since they began. Hallow finished putting on his extra gear, sliding his backpack on and slinging his rifle over his shoulder after checking the safety. He had made sure to put a flashlight on the end of his rifle, as well as packing an extra, just in case. He clipped the sat phone to his belt and grabbed a few extra magazines for his weapons before going to wait for the rest of the men. One by one, they all made their way over to him, fully geared and prepped. He spun his arm around twice as they all arrived, holding his index finger high. Load up, people. Tiro, you're driving. Without a word, they all hopped into the truck, and like that, they were off. His men were well disciplined, and while they were a tad brash, they were effective in combat. And the more they went on, the more it felt like they were indeed going to see combat. Hey boss, what kind of dinosaurs are we gonna see? It was Apone who asked, leaning forward between the seats as Tiro kept driving, following the road the mercs had created over the last month of wear and tear. I'll be honest with you, I ain't got a clue. OC's being weird about it. They claim they don't even know what it is either. Order came straight from the top, above Hoskins' head. I'm not even sure he knows about it. That was a good question. Did Hoskins know? We should debrief with him when we get back first, just to make sure everything's up to par. The further north they went, the more bumpy and uneven the terrain became. The Mercs hadn't visited the north side of the island very much, as Masrani was building in the south and center of the island so far. They traveled in near silence as the jungle seemed to close in around them, giving Hallow an uneasy feeling that settled in his stomach. It wasn't long before they reached the coordinates of the quarantine pens. On the outside was a large building, in the same color scheme as the visitor center, along with a naturalistic-looking roof. The building was smaller than the center, but it wasn't small by any means standardly. Next to it were two large enclosures, similar to the other paddocks around the park, but nowhere near the size of some, like the Tyrannosaur. These ones seemed far more tightly enclosed, their wires closer together and the cement holding seemed more firm. But immediately, everyone noticed the large hole in the fence to the left.
Eyes up. Hicks, take point. Go low. Apone, over his shoulder. The rest of you, stay on me, except for you, Ramirez. Watch our backs.
Everyone immediately formed up, taking their designated positions in a seamless display. Hicks slowly led them forward, with Apone over his shoulder as they made their way to the hole in the fencing and peered inside. The damage to the fence seemed old, as rust was gathering on the broken bits of metal and wiring. Some of the old wires were even overgrown, plants covering the ripped strands of metal. To the right, they noticed a platform overlooking both enclosures.
Tiro, Johnson, see if you can get on that platform. Take Wu's keycard with you. It might be able to help get you in.
Hallow whispered as he handed off the card. The men hurried away as the remaining four made their way inside the fence line.
I want a good clean sweep. Spread out, but stay in earshot and eye shot. We don't want to get picked off.
They began to disperse, moving through the enclosure with practiced precision, checking treetops and the underbrush simultaneously. It was quiet, but not too quiet, the hum of the jungle still buzzing around them. Here and there they discovered old animal bones in small piles, but they were sun-bleached and had clearly been here for a while, and he was almost certain they were from the goats that the old park used to feed the carnivores. He noticed Johnson and Tiro reach the platform above them, and it wasn't long before he got a radio check.
The other enclosure looks clear from up here, sir. Doesn't appear there were any animals here at all. We're watching, just in case.
Copy.
It wasn't long before the four-man team cleared the entire enclosure, and he felt a bit of relief in his chest. But just as they were preparing to meet up, Apone called out.
Got something over here.
Hallow quickly hurried over to where the man was leaning on the ground, pointing his flashlight into what appeared to be a hole or tunnel of some kind. It was small, but large enough that one of them could probably squeeze through if they took their gear off. The tunnel appeared to be worn from use, but the nearby grass seemed almost undisturbed.
What do you think? What I think is that this was probably made by the animals we're looking for. There's no body or anything in the rest of the enclosure, so maybe they're down here.
He considered it for a moment before turning to Hicks.
Hicks, go and foremost see about this and see what they have to say.
Hallow handed him the sat phone and he walked off.
There's no footprints in or around it. Who knows if the animals even still use it? The park went down years ago, so they could be long gone by now.
He looked around the tunnel just to be sure, but indeed found no signs of life other than the trampled grass by his men, and it wasn't long before Hicks returned, shaking his head.
They said to drop a grenade into it, just in case. Otherwise, to find Yuri's men and continue on our mission.
At that, Hallow realized that he hadn't seen Yuri's vehicle here, and that made him feel much better. The other team had probably come here, found the same as they had, been unable to contact OC, and just continued onwards.
Well, let's not disappoint. Hicks, you have the honors. Go ahead and drop a grenade down the hole.
The young man smiled as he pulled a grenade from his belt before walking over to the hole with apparent glee and pulling the pin, dropping the grenade down. They all backed up and waited before there was a very muffled thumping sound, followed by what appeared to be a shift in the ground near the hole. It appeared to almost sink inwards a bit. Curious. But they didn't pay him to be overly curious.
All right, ladies, load up. Let's get moving. I think we're done here. Put some hustle into it.
The island was rather small, just around 30 square miles, but the overly wild terrain made travel much more difficult where the Mercs hadn't been yet. But they continued on all the same, leaving behind the panic and, for now, Hallow's ominous feelings. The trip to the tunnel entrance was longer than he'd have liked. Plagued with uneven and rocky terrain as they climbed a bit of slope following what appeared to be a trail left by Yuri's team, they made slow progress. As they arrived, they saw another building of a similar design and shape to the last, except this one had a slanted rear, almost like a trapezoid. As they pulled up to the front, Hallow furrowed his eyebrows. Right there was Yuri's vehicle, completely unharmed with no one in sight. That itself wasn't inherently wrong on its own, except that one of the doors was open. The compies had a nasty habit of going into cars with the doors open, and they have a nasty little bite with some sort of sleep toxin, so they had made a habit to close all the doors. Once again, that ominous feeling began to creep back into his gut. He got out and immediately went over to the open door, which he could only see from the front view. He wished that was all he had seen. From the other side, the inside of the vehicle was stained with blood, especially near the open door, the driver's door. The seat was covered in bloody handprints over the leather, smeared in some places and much more clear in others. There appeared to be tear marks across specific areas of the seat, which he recognized as claws. He immediately unshouldered his rifle, the sight shocking him entirely.
Eyes up! Hostiles are definitely nearby.
He was as alert as can be, cautiously looking around the vehicle as his men encircled behind him.
Jesus.
Ramirez said as they also saw the carnage. The blood looked as if it was fairly dry, only larger clumps appeared to be wet, but that meant that this had only happened within the last few hours, coinciding with the radio silence.
Hicks, give OC another call. Tiro, Apone, keep watch while we investigate. Johnson, Ramirez, let's look around the car. Look for any signs of Yuri's team or our mystery dinosaur. No one approaches the building yet. Wait for orders.
Johnson went to the other doors in the car, starting to open them up as Ramirez and himself began to search around the vehicle. He almost immediately found boot prints from Yuri's team, somewhat scattered near the vehicle and trailing off toward the building. But he also saw what appeared to be at least 2 pairs of boots walking back toward the vehicle, one of which seemed to lead to the driver's door. But the next set of footprints were what appeared to be drag marks, as if something heavy was hauled to the car, or away from it.
What's this, boss? Feels almost like a scale from the other dinosaurs.
Johnson spoke as he walked up, holding up what appeared at first glance to be a long strand of thick black hair. Upon closer inspection, he saw that Johnson was right. It wasn't hair, but some sort of scale or similar. He took it and looked at it up and down before looking at the pointed base, slightly darker than the rest of the object.
If I didn't know any better, I'd say that's a quill. It's like a thick feather kind of thing, like some birds have, but that's definitely different from the ones I've seen on birds.
Do any of the dinosaurs have quills?
Not that I know of outright, but who can keep track of what all these things have or don't have? Leave that to the eggheads.
Hicks walked up while they were talking, looking a tad pale.
Report?
OC says to proceed with the mission, but don't secure the area. They said to find and eliminate any hostile dinosaurs near or underground if we can. But the main objective has changed. We're here to find Yuri and his team and head back. They don't seem to want any casualties on this island.
Finally, some good news. That was one benefit of working for this company. In the presence of dangerous extinct animals, lawsuits were all too common. They did whatever they could to minimize the casualties no matter what, though he did know that he and the men had the weakest legal cases of anyone on the island.
No point in talking about it then. 2 groups of 3, either side of the door. Hicks, Apone, you're in the lead again.
The men immediately followed orders, and he marched them quickly to the door as they all raised their rifles and aimed forward. For the first time, Hallow realized that the door was open slightly, as if ominously inviting them in.
Flashlights, gents. It's dark in there, and we don't want any surprises.
Johnson said as he chimed in. Hallow smiled and shook his head, and all the men did as asked.
Same situation. Hicks, you're low, Apone, you're high, and the rest of us follow behind. Move it.
Apone opened the door with a slow creak as the old metal moved outwards. Within, rows of old turned-off lights adorned what appeared to be a dismally dark hallway. Rusted yellow railings lined an old metallic catwalk, concrete on either side. As their flashlights looked around, it wasn't long before they saw a blood trail right up the middle of the pathway. Hallow steeled himself as the men moved forward, their first steps echoing off the metal walkway far too loudly for his liking.
Follow the blood, but go slowly. Check your corners. No surprises.
Little by little, they worked their way indoors, the light from the door beginning to fade behind them as they advanced. Hallow turned to check the left side as Hicks gasped, and a burst of gunfire snapped him back to attention. The gunfire was short and quick, and it was followed by what appeared to be a sort of clicking sound as Hicks stood there frozen and unmoving.
Sir, there's definitely something down here.
Hallow used his flashlight to follow the kid's own, but he couldn't see anything. His light went over the areas where the bullets hit, but there was no creature in sight, and no sign of it, even though there were bullet holes in the wall.
Hicks, are you sure? I'm not seeing anything here.
Sir, I know I saw something. It ran so fast I could barely see it in the shadows.
Hicks had his hands tight on his weapons, and Hallow was worried that the kid might fire again. He lifted his hand up, signaling for the men to hold fast for a moment while they waited. Hicks wasn't a liar, so he would give the man a moment. He waited, scanning for any sign of this creature, undoubtedly a dinosaur of some form.
Hicks, keep your eyes sharp. I trust you, but don't hold us up unless you're sure. And hold your fire. We don't want to accidentally shoot Yuri or his guys.
The merc nodded, but he was still very tense. They continued down what appeared to be an endless hallway from what Hallow could see, and everyone was extremely silent. The signs had grown worse and worse the further inwards they traveled. Blood now extended onto the railways and walls, some dried, with larger, still wet portions like the car earlier. Spent ammo casings began to rattle as the men walked past them, the rolling metal causing the rest of the men to tense even further. Eventually, they reached their first crossroad at the end of the tunnel. He shined his flashlight on the arrows with signs pointing in either direction. Most seemed to lead towards maintenance areas for the original park's enclosures. Some were more notable, like marine facility or quarantine pens, but one in particular caught his eye, geothermal power station. That was likely where Yuri and his team would have went to begin securing, but his thoughts were cut off as the same clicking he heard after Hicks was firing sounded again in the tunnel leading towards the power station. He snapped his light over in that direction, but saw nothing except the blood-stained catwalk. He looked closer at the blood, stepping forwards, and saw two toed footprints leading through it. They were smaller than the raptor prints, but bore the same distinct mark. He followed the blood slowly until his light came onto a discarded rifle. As he approached the rifle, more shots began to ring out in the hallway suddenly, causing Hallow and his team to spread out to either wall.
What the hell was that? Who fired?
This time, none of the men chimed in.
Boys, take responsibility. Who did it?
None of them confessed, and as he looked at each one and prepared to scold them, the shots began to ring out again, towards them.
Who the hell is firing on me and my men?
For the longest time, there was no reply until bullets began to ring out again in the hallway. A hostile here? Could it be one of the spies? InGen had always had a problem with infiltrators. It's what took down the first park, according to Hoskins.
Men, we need to try and capture whoever that is alive. It might be a spy of some kind, and Hoskins will want him.
Hallow turned to Apone, who reached onto his belt and pulled out a flash grenade.
All right, ladies, get ready and don't look right away. Keep your eyes closed. This tunnel will make us all blind if we ain't careful.
Apone waited for the next burst of gunfire and its disappearance before throwing the grenade outwards. They all ducked their heads as the flash lit the tunnel like a firework. Hallow turned, and in the last vestiges of the light, it was almost as if dozens of pairs of small high beams flashed back towards him in the darkness. But then he blinked, and they were gone. He thought nothing of it, a trick of the light, as he ordered his men forward towards the shooter. Having thrown the grenade, Apone found him first, on top of a beam on the side of the wall. His weapon dropped to the floor as he grabbed his face and groaned. The man was wearing one of their uniforms, however, equipped in the very same gear. He shined a flashlight on him, and suspicion mixed with anger began to grow in his stomach. It was Yuri.
Grab him down from there and cuff him.
Ramirez walked forward to comply, dragging the groaning man to the floor as Hallow shined the light directly on his face.
What the hell do you think you're doing, Yuri?
No lights, they'll see. Yuri shouted this suddenly, leaping up towards Hallow, but Hallow was a big man, and with one swift elbow to the gut, Yuri fell back.
Don't rush at me like that. What the hell are you talking about?
It's them! They're here! Watching us! We have to turn off the lights, they'll find us! He squirmed as Ramirez was cuffing him, but in his state he was in no condition to fight back. As Ramirez finished, he signaled over to him.
Look at this, boss.
He was shining his light on one of Yuri's forearms, which was black and blue in color and covered with a mix of dried and fresh blood. Several small puncture marks formed a semicircle where the blood was still oozing from.
What in the hell? What happened to you, Yuri?
But the man gave no real reply, still mumbling about some hypothetical they. He was worried that it might not be hypothetical and that Yuri had actually seen something. He made Yuri look at him, and that's when he noticed the other man's eyes. Yuri's eyes were bloodshot, thick red lines running through like a creeping fungus, and his pupils were worse. It was almost as if there was a film over them, obscuring most of his natural eye color. It was a murky green and white, and it almost looked as if he was blind.
Yuri!
He tried to get his attention, but the man was staring downwards now and mumbling to himself. He forced the man to look up at him.
Yuri, what the hell happened to you? Where are the rest of your men?
He said it forcefully, like a parent scolding their child. But Yuri didn't answer. He had gone slack-jawed and seemed to be staring off just over Hallow's shoulder. Hallow turned, as did Hicks, shining their flashlights down the way they had come. Standing there, silhouetted against the fading light from outside, was a dinosaur. It was shorter than the men, perhaps 4, maybe 5 feet tall. It had a lithe appearance with a thin, pointed snout and a pair of sickle claws similar to a raptor. Quills just like the ones Johnson had discovered lined its head and back, but the most startling feature was its eyes. Their eyes were bright white in color, as if he was staring into 2 miniature moons. As their lights moved over the eyes, they reflected back, just like an alligator. That's when he realized there wasn't just one of them. As the rest of the men turned, their lights lit up the hallway, shining on what appeared to be hundreds of eyes that reflected back at them from the shadows. The dinosaurs responded with the same clicking noise he had heard earlier, but now he was certain where it came from. Apone was the first to respond. Without hesitation, the man began to fire towards the animals, who scattered like pigeons in Manhattan, but not away. The dinosaurs seemed to crawl on the walls, run along the ground, and dash towards them with inhuman speed.
Open fire, all of you! Don't let those things in close!
He remembered Yuri's arm as Apone pushed towards the front of the group, while Ramirez and Hallo took up positions on either side of the cuffed Yuri, who had begun incoherently rambling. Tiro and Johnson didn't move positions, just began to fire where they stood, while Hicks moved back. But Hallo didn't realize just how bad it was. In the first exchange of fire, most of the men didn't seem to hit anything, the dinosaurs moving too quickly in the shadows to provide good targets. Hallo himself was using the flash of the other men's weapons to find his targets. He managed to hit at least 3 separate creatures, though if they died, he didn't have time to check. The animals were upon them in what felt like seconds. Apone's gunfire seemed to split them like a river, dividing them down either side of the catwalk. Just as the animals began to reach either side of Apone, Yuri stood up suddenly, shaking off the distracted Ramirez, who nearly shot Hallo from his sudden movement. Yuri bolted in the opposite direction of the tunnel, his hands still cuffed behind him.
Hicks, stop him!
He turned back to the others as the kid bolted after the escaping merc. The swarm was already upon them, encroaching around Apone's heels as he attempted to keep them at bay. Tiro and Johnson were assisting him, covering him while he unloaded his rifle, but it was all too quick. Apone had to reload sooner than later, dropping the rifle in favor of his sidearm and knife.
Apone, back up! You're gonna get overwhelmed!
Hallo pushed forward to Tiro and Johnson's position, with Ramirez joining him. Apone listened, timing his backstep with a shot so he didn't get caught off guard. His unit was well trained, and it showed as some of the animals began to die as they got too close. He noticed that some seemed to retreat, but most of them were still pressing forward, as if these animals were desperate. But once again, sometimes good things can't last forever. Dropping from above like an owl onto a mouse, one of the dinosaurs landed directly on Johnson's shoulders, forcing the man to the ground. Hallo turned, kicking the animal off his compatriot, but not before the animal delivered a savage bite to his thigh. Hallo screamed in pain and fell over himself, but quickly sat upright, stuffing the barrel of his rifle against the animal's head before pulling the trigger. But that one distraction was all the dinosaurs needed.
Apone!
Hallo turned to see that without his or Johnson's supporting fire, the dinosaurs had surrounded Apone, cutting him off from the rest of the mercs. One of the dinosaurs bit into Apone's leg before anyone could react, pulling backwards and causing Apone to fall forward. Johnson scrambled upwards, attempting to rush towards their friend, his rifle clicking as he reloaded it. Hallo struggled to his feet, trying to get in Johnson's way, but the bite on his leg was surprisingly painful, even though it wasn't deep, and he couldn't stop him. Apone was on the ground, swinging his knife wildly as the fall had knocked his sidearm out of his hand. Johnson fought towards him, scattering some and even killing 2 more of the animals. Tiro and Ramirez still gave supporting fire as Johnson grabbed the strap on Apone's vest and began pulling him away as the other 3 tried to cover him. But then a scream rang out in the tunnel behind them. Hallo turned just in time to see Yuri being dragged through a vent, his hands still cuffed behind his back as he screamed. Hicks was on the ground with one of the dinosaurs on top of him, using his rifle to keep the snapping jaws at bay. With both of his hands occupied, he couldn't reach for his sidearm, and Hallo decided to do something. He fired at the animal, but missed, still swaying from the sudden pain in his leg spiking. He attempted to fire again, but that was his mistake. His vision grew somewhat blurry for a moment, and as he fired, his bullet hit Hicks on the arm, causing it to buckle. As the rifle slipped from his hands, the dinosaur took advantage, biting into the kid's shoulder hard. Even through his blurry vision at this distance, he could see the blood welling from the wound.
Hicks, no!
His focus snapped back as he shook his head clear. He attempted to run towards them, but his feet were dragging thanks to the bite, as though they were encased in some kind of lead. Hicks' scream was haunting as the kid was dragged by his shoulder towards the same vent Yuri had disappeared into. He stumbled on his approach and even attempted to fire another shot at the dinosaur, but missed again. He could still hear the gunfire behind him and managed to break into a sprint just as the pair reached the vent. He grabbed one of Hicks' legs, holding on desperately as the kid screamed.
Help me, sir! Help!
Hicks tried to use his uninjured arm to smack the animal on the face, but his position was unfavorable and he could barely reach the dinosaur. Hallo put his feet against the wall to get better leverage and pulled. Hallo heaved with all his might before something slammed into his side, knocking him off of Hicks' leg. Now it was Hallo's turn, those snapping jaws just inches from his face as a new dinosaur was atop him. Holding it by the neck was barely enough. Its claws began to dig into his arm. He felt its sickle claw sink downwards and meet his vest, stopping it from penetrating his skin. Barely holding on, he drew his knife from its sheath, sticking it directly into the animal's eye with a sickening squelching sound. He tossed the dinosaur off of him and immediately went back to the vent. But it was too late. He looked within just in time to see Hick's feet turn around the bend in the vent, a bloody trail following him as his screams echoed in the hollow metal. Hallow sat back for a moment, feeling defeated, before the gunfire once again brought his attention back to the others. It was utter chaos. Tiro and Ramirez were attempting to help Johnson drag Apone away, but they were nearly surrounded on all sides. He noticed for the first time, as the world seemed to slow around him, that these dinosaurs were scarred. Not like some of the raptors, but worse. Lips split open, skin clinging to gaunt bodies, missing tails or limbs, and hundreds of scars crisscrossing their body like a puzzle. These animals looked savage, as if they had fought tooth and nail every day for their survival. These were desperate, hungry beasts that had likely lived in these tunnels since the original park fell, so he made the toughest call he could.
Retreat! Everyone, fall back to me!
He stood upright, wincing hard from the pain in his leg as blood began to leak from the wound again, but he ignored it.
But Apone! Sir, he'll never make it!
None of us will make it if we stay here. We need a defensible position. We're too exposed and we've lost another man already. Move it!
He desperately hoped that the men would listen to him, and Tiro and Ramirez both reluctantly began to run towards him, some of the animals chasing as Hallow himself laid down some cover fire.
Johnson, now!
But Johnson wouldn't let Apone go. The two were steadfast friends since before they had even joined InGen.
Leave me! Get out of here, idiot!
I'm not leaving you here! Johnson heaved Apone over his shoulders as the rest of them gave covering fire, but they were too far surrounded. As Johnson began to run, he was almost immediately tripped by one of the dinosaur bodies laying around him. Apone slid off his shoulders and off the catwalk, but not before pulling a grenade from his belt.
Johnson, now!
But Johnson didn't recover in time. One of the animals leapt onto his back, its jaws clamping around the helmet on his head as the sickle claws sank into his sides, avoiding his vest. Another rushed up to his side, grabbing his arm in its jaws and gnawing on it as the man began to scream. It all happened so fast, as Hallow shot the one off his back, he heard Apone yell,
"That's right, come get some, you ugly, scaly motherfucker."
Hallow could feel his eardrums pop as the explosion rang in the tunnel. Part of the catwalk was shredded by shrapnel, right beneath where Johnson was laying. He watched the grenade throw Johnson and the dinosaur on his arm upwards for a moment before falling to the ground. Blood welled from beneath his vest, and he was unmoving afterwards, shrapnel no doubt embedded within. The dinosaur that was on his arm hung limply from a now shredded railing, but most of the dinosaurs were not fazed. They seemed merely startled, cautious. He was certain that Apone had taken a few with him.
No! No! No!
He was enraged, but he knew it wouldn't do anything at this moment. He had to focus on keeping the others alive.
Let's go! Now! Run, idiots, run!
He took off down the hallway towards the geothermal power station, and he could hear the others right on his heels. He fought through the pain in his leg, but he could tell that it would slow him down eventually.
What do we do, boss?
Hallow could hear the panic in his voice, the desperation.
We gotta find somewhere defensible and figure a way out of here.
His head began to swirl, and he was becoming dizzy, lightheaded, and that feeling of lead began to creep back to him. He turned to look over his shoulders, and he didn't see the animals behind him. But the tunnel was dark, and in his head he felt like he could still hear the sound of their feet running on the metal behind him. But it wasn't long before the feelings turned his legs to jelly and his head began swimming, and as he ran, he collapsed forward onto his face as darkness overwhelmed him. He awoke with a start in a large, open room. It was surprisingly bright in the room and incredibly warm, and he could feel himself sweating. The hum of electricity was all around him, but the most prominent thing was the sounds. He felt as if he could still hear gunfire and screams, and he stood straight upright in a panic.
"Sir!"
It was Tiro, and he began to calm down slightly as the man grabbed his shoulder. His face looked distorted, as if Hallow was looking through some kind of mirrored glass.
Tiro, what happened?
"We managed to get to the geothermal power station. There's some big metal doors here that are powered by a lock, so we figured it's the safest place as any for now. Ramirez and I blocked up any vents that would lead into here, and the other door, but we swear we heard them outside the room already. There's also another door we blocked too."
Is it just the three of us?
Hallow still felt as if he could hear Hick's screams echoing in this large room.
"Yes, sir. You've been out for a little under an hour. We haven't heard anything from anyone else, but our radio signals are still scrambled, and Hicks had the sat phone.
Hallow sighed deeply, allowing his sadness to show for a moment before he steeled himself. He still had to come up with a plan to get these men out of here. He gazed around the room toward the source of light until he saw that it was a bright orange glowing from nearby. There was lava down here, which must have been why it was so warm, and it must be what powered the geothermal energy on the island. He vaguely remembered someone mentioning something about a volcano.
Where's Ramirez?
Tiro gestured and led him around the corner to a small table near what looked like a control panel of some kind. Ramirez was hunched over the table, pondering over maps and what looked like other documents as well.
Sir, we've found a map of these underground tunnels. It's pretty old, and we can't make out everything, but there's another exit about a mile southwest of us. Leads in the same direction we came from above ground, towards those quarantine pens.
Hallow looked at the map, trying to follow Ramirez's hand, but all he could see was swirling lines of ink and distorted words. He blinked a few times, rubbing his eyes, and his head began to hurt again, but he couldn't make out the words no matter what he did. There was still a dull ache in his leg, which he looked down to see was bandaged and soaked in blood.
I have to be honest with you guys. I think that fall made me hit my head too hard or something. I can't read this no matter what I do. I can barely make out the words.
He knew there was no point in lying. It would be far more dangerous if he wasn't honest with the men.
I'll take the map and take point then when we leave, sir. I'll try and get us out of here.
Thank you. I trust you, but how are we getting out of here? If we open that door, that's probably what they're waiting for. Hoping for.
Ramirez and Tiro both nodded and exchanged a knowing glance.
Remember when I said there was a second door we blocked? It leads away from those tunnels and reconnects with the main tunnel system, near the quarantine pens. It's a bit of a tighter squeeze, but it's safer than going the main way.
Tiro pointed at the map, but Hallow still couldn't discern it. He thought he might have had a concussion, perhaps, but he nodded, having faith in his team.
Let's go then. I'll be the slowest, so I'll walk in the rear. You two are my responsibility.
Maybe Tiro should take up the rear so you don't get left behind.
Hallow snapped, anger rising suddenly in him out of nowhere.
No! I can't lose any more of you. Especially vets like the two of you. You have to make it.
Hallow could feel his breathing getting heavier, but he chalked it up to the concussion. They both looked at him quizzically, as he wasn't one prone to bursts of anger like Hoskins.
There's no time to waste. Let's get moving.
It took them about 10 minutes to move everything out of the way of the door. Ramirez took point just like he said, with Tiro right behind him and Hallow standing in the rear. All he had left was Tiro's sidearm, as his own and his knife had been lost trying to save Hicks. He made sure that it was fully loaded before they left the room. With rifles in hand, the other two led him forwards, once again into the darkness, save for the flashlight shining ahead of them. In his mind, he felt as though he could still hear the animals' clicking sounds as they entered into the hallway, but the lights revealed nothing even when he looked behind. This area was much more narrow, allowing maybe two of them to stand shoulder to shoulder as they walked. But without a metal catwalk, they moved almost silently, which he was grateful for. The other two moved along quickly, with the practiced precision he expected from his mercs, but Hallow himself was quickly lagging behind. He found himself holding them up, and he hated himself for it. He already felt responsible for the others, Hicks most of all. He was directly responsible for the kid, and he didn't want any more of them on his conscience. But nonetheless, despite his protests, they waited for him at every turn. At one point, he believed he heard the dinosaurs running behind them and snapped around, only to be greeted with a dark and empty hallway. It was as if every sound, every footstep held some kind of monster. He felt as if they were lurking in the shadows, and his paranoia was growing. But suddenly, they came to a halt as Ramirez put his arm up.
We're at the main hall. We go left, and the exit's about 200 feet past the quarantine pens, and we're only a half a mile from those.
Hallow nodded, twitching as he heard some sound behind him, but again, as he snapped around, nothing was there.
Just let's go silently, as quiet as possible. Don't walk on the metal if you can avoid it.
They both nodded somberly, lifting their rifles as Ramirez opened the door with an ominous creak and they stepped into the main hall. The darkness was nearly complete here, no outside light coming in, just the light from their flashlights. They moved without a word, as quietly as they could, down the hall. His vision began to grow blurry again, and no matter how much he rubbed his eyes, he couldn't stop it. He thought he heard the clicking sound in the direction they were heading, but when the men stopped and looked with him, they saw nothing, and they didn't hear the same noise he did. But they trusted him, so they didn't question it, even though Hallow himself had begun to. After what seemed like an eternity, they found what they were looking for. A door labeled quarantine. Authorized personnel only stood in their path. Ramirez seemed to smile, but Hallow wasn't sure if it was just his distorted face due to his concussion. It wasn't long before they found a ladder, just where Ramirez said it would be. But then Hallow heard the noise again and dismissed it, but this time Tiro grabbed his shoulder. All 3 men froze, and they knew it could have only been the distinct clicking sounds of the dinosaurs, and it sounded closer than he would have liked. Too close.
Go, Ramirez. Quickly. Get that hatch open.
Tiro and Hallow stood at the base of the ladder, watching the direction they heard the sound from. Both men were tense and sweating, weapons drawn. It felt like an eternity as Ramirez climbed the ladder. It wasn't long before the first pair of eyes rounded the corner down the hallway from them, the soft clinking sounds as its claws struck the catwalk like cannons in Hollow's ears. He looked back up the ladder, barely seeing Ramirez's feet in the darkness above. He shined the light upwards as Ramirez neared the top of the ladder and looked down reflexively at the light, but Hallow panicked as soon as his light shone past Ramirez.
Get down from there!
But he was too late. Ramirez instinctually turned to look as one of the dinosaurs opened those white, beady eyes inches from his face, curled up asleep on top of the ladder. Ramirez screamed as the dinosaur acted immediately, jaws clamping around Ramirez's face, avoiding his helmet unlike Johnson earlier. Hallow turned and tried to fire, but Ramirez and the dinosaur fell down the ladder towards them, knocking him over. He scrambled to his feet, and as he turned back to look, shining the flashlight towards them, the dinosaur snapped its head back, tearing out Ramirez's throat along with half his face. It turned towards Hallow and hissed, its jaws parting as globs of Ramirez's blood stretched like saliva in its open maw.
No!
He reached a hand towards his fallen companion, but Tiro wasted no time, shooting the animal before picking him up to his feet.
Into the room.
The pair of them scrambled back the way they came, towards the quarantine pen doors. He could hear Ramirez gurgling behind him, the man still alive and choking on his own blood as the life ebbed away from the wound on his throat. As they reached the door, Tiro threw him inside, darting in himself and slamming the metal door shut behind them. It wasn't long before the animals began to slam on the door from the outside, their menacing hisses piercing his very soul. He felt scared, panicked, more so than he had ever been in his entire life. A mission had never failed so desperately for him. He had never lost so many men. But as he spiraled, a thought came to him. He reached for his leg, cutting off the bandages to see his wound, and he gasped. His leg looked just like the wound they had seen on Yuri earlier. It was black and blue in color, with the stench of decay, as if the leg was rotting while he was still alive. Pus and blood oozed from the bite marks, and the realization struck him. These animals had venom. That was why he couldn't focus, couldn't see straight. It might even be why he's hearing all these sounds. As he snapped back to reality, he realized that Tiro was vomiting in the corner of the room, and he turned to see the rest of it. Corpses were the first thing he saw, 3 of them, piled in the center of the room. The bodies were mangled, bleeding, and seemed to have flesh missing from all parts. The dinosaurs were eating these. He managed to stumble his way over to it, realizing that all the uniforms were of his people, though in their state none of the corpses were recognizable. He grabbed a pair of visible dog tags, shining his light to reveal Apone's name, making his gut clench. These were his men, and Yuri's. As tears filled his eyes, he continued to scan his surroundings, and he was even more shocked. Large stacks of plants lined the walls of the room, using the walls themselves as support. The plants were in various stages of decay, but too neatly piled to be natural. And then he saw limbs. In one of the piles next to him, he walked over to see one of the young Gallimimus buried within the plants, unmoving. He saw a similar wound to the one on his leg on its neck, still bleeding. He looked over to the other piles, realizing that some had human limbs in them instead. He stumbled over to one, recognizing his men's uniform as the venom made him more sluggish. He slowly unburied the body before him, recognizing the same boots, the boots that he had clung to in a desperate attempt to save someone's life. As he pulled the last of the plants away from his face, there he was. Hicks! The kid's eyes were open, staring off into space. His body was limp, and his bullet wound still bleeding on his arm. He reached for the collar of his uniform, pulling it down to reveal the bite on his shoulder as well.
Tiro, these dinosaurs, they're venomous, like the compies. I had suspicions because of my own bite, but...
He continued to unbury Hicks when he suddenly noticed the kid's eyes move. He looked again, and again the eyes moved. They seemed almost pleading, welling up with tears.
He's alive!
Tiro was immediately by his side.
Let's get him unburied.
They began to just completely rip the plants off, until they eventually stopped as they reached his chest. His breath caught in his throat, and Tiro leaned to the side as he began to vomit again. Hicks' still breathing chest had been carved open on the surface, revealing his flesh and fat beneath the skin. Embedded within the flesh were eggs. Pale yellowish white in color, they were sunk into the chest itself, laid there purposefully. And, despite it all, Hicks was still breathing slowly, shallowly.
It's a nest.
He's being used as an incubator. Oh, what kind of freak show did they send us into down here?
He somberly closed the kid's eyes before he and Tiro took the eggs from his chest, smashing them into the wall as a last act of revenge. Tiro looked at him desperately, and Hallow could still only see the swirling mess the venom allowed from him.
What do we do, sir?
He reached into a pouch on Hicks' vest, pulling out the satellite phone, but there wasn't any good signal down here, of course.
Is there any other way out of this room?
The pair of them began to look, but Hallow knew that he wouldn't be much help. Knocking things over, stumbling around, the venom had truly begun to take effect on his motor functions. The dinosaurs kept knocking on the door all the while, desperate to try and get back to their now unguarded nests. But thankfully, eventually Tiro called him over.
It's a big vent, sir. We'll have to crawl and take our vests off to get in, but it's here.
He joined Tiro near the vent, peering inside. It seemed to connect to a similar room, but he couldn't tell for sure in this darkness. They took off their vests regardless and slowly made their way through without any other choice, bringing whatever gear they could fit, including their guns, in a slow crawl. On the other side, they stood up, assessing the room. This looked more like a data room of some kind, various old office supplies and computer equipment strewn about. But as they looked around, even through the venom's distortion, Hallow recognized the remnants of grenade shards inside. As Tiro closed the vent behind him, he realized he knew where they were. On one side of the room was a large hole in the wall, carved into the dirt beside it, and much of the scattered supplies came from this direction. He realized that this is where they had dropped a grenade earlier, and hope began to kindle in his chest, even as the door broke in the other room. They could hear the dinosaurs swarming into it, searching for them.
Go! Tiro, go!
He turned the other man around, smacking the satellite phone into his hand.
Take this. Call OC and tell them what happened down here. Make sure they finish off every last one of these things.
Sir?
I'll be right behind.
They were cut off as they heard a hissing sound, and Hallow immediately knew where. He dove in front of the vent, throwing his entire body against it as the first of the dinosaurs crashed against it.
Go! Get out of here! Someone has to make it back and let them know what's going on. Just do me a favor.
Sir?
Punch Hoskins right in his jaw for me.
Hallow smiled as he spoke, even as his vision began to distort further, Tiro looking more monstrous with each passing moment.
Go. Get out of here. I can't hold this forever.
I'll come back for you, sir.
Hallow continued to smile, and the two men shared a somber nod, and with that the younger man began to scramble up the hole, just barely big enough to accommodate him thanks to the grenade they had thrown earlier. At this point, everything seemed to grow quiet around him. Hallow could barely make out the sounds of the dinosaurs behind him, or even the pain as their claws tore his back open through the grate. He just watched Tiro scramble up, eventually seeing his feet disappear just like Hicks. Everything was muffled from sound to sight, as if it was all so far away, like a dream. Hallow reached into his shirt pocket, fishing out his pack of now crushed cigarettes. He managed to take out one that was mostly intact, and he tossed the pack aside. His viscera-covered hands could barely fish the lighter from his pocket, shaking as the venom worked its way through his blood. The room became unrecognizable around him, the patterns and swirls of the venom making everything appear as a shadow. It felt as if danger or death lurked around every corner. And yet, he smiled, as if he was safe at home. He brought the lighter to the cigarette and took one large puff as the dinosaurs' hissing and roars echoed distantly in his ears. And as the sounds all began to fade, he closed his eyes and exhaled. Hey there folks, thank you all so very much for watching. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to all my collaborators, E.D.G.E Science, Lakota Raptor, Harrison Duran, and InGen2D. They all bring a distinction to their characters, and they make fantastic content on their own, so make sure you go check them out. I'll leave their links down in the description below. Once again, thank each and every one of you. I couldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for you, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy, please make sure to leave a like and maybe comment and subscribe if you want. But otherwise, folks, make sure to drink plenty of water, be good people, and have a fantastic day.